Mordecai and Haman. And other times throughout history where our people have gone through severe tribulation and severe persecution, almost annihilation, and even in our days through Hitler and definitely in our families, our own personal families, in the Inquisition, in both Spain, Mexico, and here in New Mexico. And we've gone through this, but Adonai wants to prepare a final generation of martyrs that will give their lives for the faith. And so the secrets of Hanukkah and the coming anti-Messiah is the place that we introduce that concept, and we want to make sure that many people will be able to study and learn about that. We've been talking about the levels of Hanukkah understanding. Last week we did the Hanukkahs level with its secrets. There's at least 7 levels that I have found. The Hanukkahs level, the prophetic level and its secrets, the historic, legendary level, the messianic level, the moral level, and the eschatological level. The legendary levels, we're going to be presenting the prophetic, the historic, and the legendary levels today. And next week we'll do the messianic, moral, and eschatological, or the last days. Eschatology is a study of the last days. So the eschatological level is about the last days and about the book of Revelation. So today we're going to, we've already done the Hanukkahs level, and today we're going to continue. Now, just a little back, circling back, if you will. There are many Hanukkahs mentioned in Scripture. The word Hanukkah, ekainia in Greek, means to dedicate in English. And it means to set apart, to dedicate something unto Adonai. Of course, the Hanukkahs that we see in Scripture have to do with the altar in the temple. But we also see that the word Hanukkah also means to dedicate, even dedicating our children before Adonai. Interesting, today we had little Levi Isaiah Silva dedicated, set apart unto Adonai, and we prayed for him and set him apart. And that is a Hanukkah. Now, the first Hanukkah was actually the temple, the tabernacle of Moses. And the first Hanukkah was 8 days long. It took 8 days to dedicate the tabernacle of Moses. The second Hanukkah was the first temple of Solomon. Again, an 8-day celebration to dedicate the temple of Solomon. And then the third Hanukkah was the little temple of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel built a little temple, and after it was, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and that was the third Hanukkah. Now, this temple, as we're going to see today, and there you see the Abomination of Desolation. That's supposed to be a statue right there. And Antiochus builds a statue and sacrifices a pig on this altar. So this altar and this temple was an abomination of desolation took place, that it was desecrated. So the fourth Hanukkah of the same second temple of Zerubbabel had to be rededicated. Now, when people talk about Hanukkah, this is the Hanukkah that they're mostly talking about, but it's the fourth Hanukkah. Of course, there is a temple of Herod that he kind of builds, but we don't know anything about this temple, if they did a Hanukkah or a dedication of that temple. We don't have anything scripturally or historically. But then there's going to be a fifth Hanukkah, which will be the third temple, and we call this the Antichrist temple. This is the temple that throughout the Jewish Christian world, everybody's getting ready for a third temple. And then this temple is going to be destroyed at the end of the tribulation period, and a fourth temple is going to be set up with a sixth Hanukkah. And this is Yeshua, and this is called Ezekiel's temple in Ezekiel 40 and following. And then this will be for 1,000 years in the millennium. And then when the millennium's over, there's going to be a new heaven, new earth, and a new temple. And it says that Yahweh and the Lamb are the temple thereof. Again, it doesn't mention the seventh Hanukkah, but knowing Adonai the way he is, there seems to be Adonai does things the same yesterday, today, and forever. The way he does in one generation, yes, sometimes it changes, but the idea is still there. So this is what we studied last week. Again, if you would like to do part one, go to our YouTube channel and do the Secrets of Hanukkah part 1. Now, today we're going to start with chapter 2 of our Secrets of Hanukkah, and we're going to go into the prophetic level. Now, this prophetic level is from Daniel to the beast. From Daniel to the beast in the book of Revelation. Now, there are 3 levels, and 2 we're going to study today, and 1 next week. We're going to look at the prophetic level today that goes from the time of Daniel, who wrote about 600 before the Common Era. And he wrote, and what Daniel put up to this point ends here, but Daniel's prophetic level continues into what we call the eschatological level, or the last days level. Now, what Daniel wrote prophetically, I call it a blueprint. In fact, much of what we're talking here, we're talking in our seminar that we also have on YouTube called Blueprint for the Last Days. And if you'd like to get more into this or another view of these Blueprint for the Last Days, we go further into it. But Daniel spoke prophetically. Adonai gave him a blueprint of the future. Now, the blueprint that Adonai gave Daniel was prophetically all the way up to the end of time. But it's a blueprint that all of a sudden we see here, and with Alexander the Great and Antiochus Epiphanes, this blueprint for the last days was partially fulfilled with Alexander the Great, and especially with the Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes becomes a template for the beast system. So here is the blueprint, and all of a sudden it's partially fulfilled with Antiochus, but then the final fulfillment is going to be the anti-Messiah, or the beast system there. And of course, Daniel wrote about 600 before the Common Era. Malachi writes the last book in the Tanakh about 400. Alexander is about 334 before Messiah. 168 is Antiochus, of course, 100 before the year 0. And of course, the death of Yeshua between 29 and 33. And then 100, and the death of John. And then we're about here. But we don't know when the beast system is there. Of course, this was during the Persian period, the Greek period, the Roman period, and now modern history. Modern history, actually, I would say, is from the end of the New Covenant Scriptures is when modern history begins. Now, this is what we call the historic level. Now, as far as it has gone, between Yeshua's death and the coming of the beast system, if you remember the charts that we did last week, we are in the gap, and we're going to see that again today. So this is kind of I did this chart as a bird's eye view of history from the time of Daniel to the time of the beast, looking at the prophetic level, the historical level, and the eschatological level. Now, in this is also the legendary level. I should have probably put this, I'll put it for next time. There is a legendary level that has occurred between the year 100, 200, when the Mishnah was written, and modern times. There is a legendary level of the Hanukkah, of the Maccabean Hanukkah, but we'll look at that later on as we finish our study today. What is prophecy? What is prophecy? A prophecy is a message inspired by Elohim. It's a divine revelation. Prophets spoke from Elohim as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, we are told in 2 Peter. So then a prophet is one who receives a message from Elohim and transmits it to others. That is what a prophet does. Actually, a prophet has his back to Adonai and his face, his mouth to the people. And Adonai gives him a message, inspires him with a message, and he speaks it to the people. A priest is the opposite. A priest has his back to the people and his face to Adonai. So he receives the prayers from the people and brings them to Adonai. So a prophet and a priest are two holy men that Adonai used, one from Adonai to speak to the people, one from the people so that he could speak to Adonai. Of course, we fall in the new covenant, in the apostolic scriptures, into what we call the priesthood of believers. And so Adonai allows every one of us to be a priest and bring the needs of the people, bring the needs of the body, bring intercession and petition before Adonai, whereas in biblical times there was a priest, a high priest, and the Levitical priesthood. The prophets of the Bible spoke of their time and door of the distant future. The word prophet, prophetes, is the word that means pros, forth, and phetes, to speak. So the word prophet is to speak forth. Now, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel spoke to their generations. They said, thus saith Yahweh, thus saith the way. They rebuked the kings. They rebuked the false prophets. They rebuked those that were coming against Adonai. But some of them, even in speaking to their present, they also spoke about the future. When Isaiah, in Isaiah 7:14, says, behold, the virgin shall conceive, he wasn't only talking about the wife of the king, but he was talking about a future. And it's interesting how the Greek and the Hebrew work together to fulfill that prophecy literally. Was fulfilled literally in the king's wife, but it was fulfilled literally in Yeshua's virgin birth, just with the use of the Hebrew and or Greek words. Of course, Daniel, that we're going to spend some time, spoke to his time, but mostly he spoke of future events that will be fulfilled in Antiochus, but is going to be fulfilled eschatologically in the end hours or end minutes of world history. Like I said before, we're not living in the last days. We're not living in the last days. We're living in the last hours. if not the last minutes. But when the last minutes finally come, and the last minute will be the 70th week of Daniel, then things will be fulfilled. Now, there are many prophecies of the coming anti-Messiah, but most of us have focused on Daniel, and I call, or not only me, but even my teachers and those I've studied from have called Daniel the key to the book of Revelation. If you want to learn about end times, do not study the book of Revelation first. Study the book of Daniel first and other prophets. And once you know Daniel and the other prophets like the back of your hand, when we read the book of Revelation, we will understand, because Daniel and the other prophets are the key. They are the dictionary, if you will, that will help you read the book of Revelation. Now, the prophecies of Daniel are about the last days. Daniel is told there, now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days. In the Acharit Chayamim in Hebrew, days yet future. Of course, in the Greek, it's eschaton ton emeron, or the last days. Of course, in Hebrew, it's be'acharit chayamim, the end of days, the latter days. So both in Hebrew and Greek, we are talking about the last days. And Daniel specifically was given information on the last days, and the last days even later than us. Of course, Daniel lived about 600 before the Common Era, and he wrote about the king, he wrote about the empires, Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon, and all those that would rise up in the future. The last empire being the worst one, the one that is yet to come, what we call in Revelation the beast system, and the coming anti-Messiah that everybody has, throughout history, has said, oh, this is the one, this is. Every generation, we could find an anti-Messiah in our generation. And, of course, John, in 1 John says, yes, there are many anti-Messiahs. There are many antichrists in the King James Version. And there's many anti-Messiahs, antichrists. But there's going to be one anti-Messiah, and Scripture really calls him the beast, because him and his system are going to be very cruel and very bad. In the past, from Daniel's day, all has occurred precisely as prophesied. Messianic prophecy, whether it be about Yeshua's first coming or his second coming, and if his first coming was prophesied and occurred, we have faith that his second coming, as prophesied, will occur. What we are witnessing today on a global scale was prophesied. The birth pangs, the beginning of sorrows, we're going through that, and every generation we could see has gone through a birth pang moment, but at the time it wasn't the right time, and so we cyclically are going on chronologically unto the time that it'll occur. And it will occur. The book of Revelation, as Adonai told Daniel, the prophecy is true, the interpretation exact. So with Daniel, so with the book of Revelation. Now, when we look at the prophetic level, we're going to see Daniel chapter 2 with the great statue, Daniel chapter 7 with the four beasts, Daniel chapter 8 with the ram and the he-goat, and Daniel chapter 9 with the 70 weeks of Daniel. And so Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and he can't get his, in fact, he forgot the dream. So he tells his magicians, his people, I want you to tell me the dream and the interpretation. I just don't want you to interpret my dream. I want you to tell me what the dream was. Well, of course, they say, nobody has ever asked that of any of their magicians. So long story short, Daniel comes and he prays, and Adonai gives him the vision. He goes to the king, and again, read the whole thing from 1 through 45. We'll begin in 31. When he comes to the king Nebuchadnezzar and says, you have had a vision, your majesty, and this is what you saw. A statue, a great statue of extreme brightness set before you, terrible to see. The head of this statue was of fine gold. Its chest and arms were of silver. Its belly and thighs were of bronze. Its legs of iron, and part iron and part clay. And so Nebuchadnezzar sees this dream. While you were gazing, a stone broke away untouched by any hand and struck the feet of iron and clay and shattered them. Then iron and clay, bronze, silver, gold, all broke into pieces as fine as chaff on the threshing floor in summer. The wind blew them away, leaving not a trace behind. And the stone that had struck the statue grew into a great mountain, filling the whole world. And so what Daniel gives the interpretation to the kings, to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, is world history from his time, from that time on, world history from there, the time of the Gentiles, and it's going to grow, become mighty, but then at the end, the whole world history is going to come to an end. It's going to shatter, and everything of every system, every king, every mighty man, every noble, every dictator, I don't want to go, not Biden. And all those people are going to be shattered and gone. And he sees this. Can you imagine? Adonai gave this vision to a pagan king of one of the greatest pagan kings of his day. He was the head of gold. And as we're going to see, you, your majesty, the King of kings, to whom the Elohim of heaven has given sovereignty, power, strength, and honor. You are the golden head. And after you will come another kingdom will rise, not as great as yours, and then a third of bronze, which will rule the whole world. There will be a fourth kingdom, hard as iron that pulverizes and crushes all, like iron that breaks everything to pieces. It will crush and break all the earlier kingdoms. So gold is more expensive than silver more than bronze more than iron more than clay. But as the gold, and then the iron that is hard, but then the last is the clay. And so this whole world system, that's why today all the worlds, and everybody's trying to one up against the other, and all the empirism of the world now with China and Russia and all these situations. Remember, all that is coming to an end. All that is coming to an end. This is not to put fear into us, but to give us that hope and strength that regardless of what we see, if we keep our eyes on Adonai, it is Adonai and his kingdom that is going to have the victory. Now the feet that you saw, part earthenware and part iron, are a kingdom which will be split in two, but will retain something of the strength of iron, just as you saw the iron and clay of the earthenware together, mixed together. The feet were part iron and part potter's clay. The kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And as you saw that the iron and the clay of earthenware mixed together, so the two will be mixed in human seed. Underline that for when we get to the eschatological level next week. But they will not hold together any more than iron will blend with clay. And so there was this rock that came and hit the feet of iron and clay. In the days of those kings, again, those kings, the Elohim of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And his kingdom will not pass into the hands of another race. It will shatter and absorb all previous kingdoms and itself last forever. And as you saw a stone untouched by hand break away from the mountain and reduce iron, bronze, earthenware, silver, and gold to powder, the great Elohim has shown the king what is to take place. And so prophetically, Adonai is giving us now an insight that will be fulfilled, partially fulfilled in Antiochus, but then will be finally fulfilled in our future in the anti-Messiah. Now the dream of the great statue, the gold became Babylon, the silver became Medo-Persia, the bronze Greece, the iron Rome, and the iron and clay, a future kingdom that we still don't know. Again, people have speculated every generation, even the Pope is the Antichrist and the Catholic Church is this kingdom, or Stalin or Hitler, Gorbachev, remember Gorbachev, all kinds. But this will be historically, this is part of the historical, and we could go in history and see how each one of those fulfilled up to our point, up to the iron and clay, this was fulfilled. And right now we are living in a 2,000-year gap between Rome, which was destroyed in 410, and the iron and clay kingdom, which is still in our future. Now, Daniel also has himself a vision of 4 beasts. And this occurred in the first year of Belshazzar. Daniel, had a dream. This is Daniel 7:1. And visions passed through my head. And he wrote the dream down, and this is how the narrative began. Daniel said, I have been seeing visions in the night, and I saw that the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And he sees 4 beasts emerge from the sea. The first was like a lion with eagle's wings, and there before me was a second beast like a bear, rearing up on one of its sides. After this I looked, and there before me was another beast like a leopard, and it had 4 wings. Now we could actually, every one of these, Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9, would take a study in itself if we were to have the time. And again, I saw another vision, and there before me was a 4th beast, fearful, terrifying, very strong. And again, this 4th beast, this terrifying beast, not only are we going to see in Antiochus, but we're going to see this also eschatologically when we study the book of Revelation in the eschatological level. And of course, this 4th beast, this terrifying beast, please don't get scared. Please don't get scared. He's very terrifying. but again with 10 horns, and he insults the Most High, and he's going to torment the holy ones, the saints, the believers of the Most High, and he will plan to alter the seasons in Torah. What did I do here? Uh-oh. There we go. Sorry about that. I must have pressed the wrong button here. He will alter the seasons in Torah, and the saints will be handed over to him for a time, 2 times, and half a time. That's 3.5 years, again, when we get further along. And then there's another vision in 8:1-27 about a ram and a he-goat, and against they fight against, and so the ram was the Medo-Persians, and the he-goat was, the goat came the west, which was Javan, Greece, and again the rise of the anti-Messiah. Then we have the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Now, this is the time clock for Israel. So 70 prophetic week of years are determined for the beginning of the millennial reign. And it's from the time to return to rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of Messiah to the last 7 years of secular history. So this in Daniel 9:24-27 is one of the most exact. What he's actually saying is from the time to rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of Messiah is going to be 173,880 days. So in 170,880 days, Messiah is coming. And all of a sudden in Nehemiah 2, the king tells Nehemiah, go rebuild Jerusalem. And that starts the time clock. And all of a sudden, one Sabbath day, Yeshua was coming into Jerusalem on a donkey. And that day of coming in, many people know it as Palm Sunday wrongly. But Yeshua comes in and he says, if you had only known on this day the message of peace, but alas, it was hidden from your eyes. And then all of a sudden, after it says there in Daniel that Messiah is cut off, but not for himself. And then to the coming of the last 7 years, where the anti-Messiah is going to make a covenant with Israel for 7 years and then break the covenant in the middle of the week, and then he is going to set up the Abomination of Desolation. Of course, we did a whole 5-week study on this 70th week not too long ago. And if you'd like to study more about these, by the way, we are here every Wednesday night with questions and answers. We do a question and answer, and we go through many of these studies every so often. We are actually going through one right now, and where we're actually studying this historical prophetical Daniel. So if you want to learn more about this, join us on Wednesday nights. Now, there's no way we could go through the great vision in the book of Daniel of verses chapters 10, 11, and 12. This is so important, but it's over here prophetically. We see the coming of the vile man in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, 21. There's going to be a vile man, and he's going to set up the abomination of desolation. And then Daniel here talks all the way to the time of the end. Well, of course, we're going to find out in our next chapter that this vile man is actually Antiochus, and he sets up the abomination of desolation. Now, there are 2 abomination of desolations. One abomination of desolation is Daniel 9:27. That is still future to us. And this abomination of desolation in 11:31 already occurred. But like I said, Daniel prophesies a blueprint the blueprint is fulfilled exactly as written. Now that blueprint of Antiochus, the way he does it, is going to be now a template for how it occurs in the book of Revelation with the anti-Messiah. And so it's important to not only study Daniel from one angle, but study chapter 10, 11, and 12. And so please study that again for next week. And again, the abomination of desolation, Daniel 11:31 says, and forces shall stand on his part, and they shall profane the sanctuary, even the fortress, and shall take away the continual burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. An abomination that makes desolate. To Adonai, there's things that are abominations. An abomination to Adonai, the word abomination, is something that gets you sick to your stomach. There's things that get us sick to our stomach. Now, if I were to invite you to my home to eat, and I make some red chili stew, red chili stew with nice, little meat and just the perfect spices, and I take you to my house, and you taste it. Oh man, that is the best red chili stew I've had. And then I say, oh, and give me the recipe. You tell me, and I say, oh, I get some meat, I get some beef and some red chili and these spices, and then I add blood to it. Bleh. How many of you would get sick to your stomach? You would get sick to, or if I say, oh, that's dog meat, come to my house for dog meat, or I tell you, that's dog, you'd get sick to your stomach. That's an abomination. It's an abomination to eat blood. It's an abomination to eat dog. It's an abomination to eat cat. It's an abomination to eat pig, pork, ham, or whatever you want to call it. It's an abomination. It should get you sick to eat dog, cat, and pig. It's an abomination. An abomination is also, idols were an abomination to Adonai. Idols make Adonai sick. Other things, fornication, make Adonai sick. Eating meat of roadkill. How many would, hey, there's a deer on the side of the road. Let's get it and take it home and eat it, roadkill. How many would eat a squirrel that's been roadkill on the side of the road? That would make us sick. These are 4 things that make Adonai sick. 4 things that make Adonai sick throughout Scripture. By the way, in the Jerusalem Council, what are the 4 things that all Gentiles were supposed to, if they were becoming new believers, were supposed to not do? 4 things that make Adonai sick. And one of the things that makes him sick is idol worship. In fact, what Antiochus will do, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, is that he will set up this statue in the temple of Adonai, and sacrifice a pig in it. And again, that's the abomination of desolation. It's happened in the past. It's going to happen in the future. Daniel 12:11. And from that time, the continual burnt offering shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate up shall be 1,290 days. So there is another abomination, not this one, but the one in 927 is still yet future from Mars. So the prophetic bottom line is that Daniel's prophetic predictions are a blueprint and or a template for the historic and yet future fulfillments of the coming of anti-Messiah, the beast. And so I would encourage you to study Daniel prophetically, plus all the other last day events in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the prophets and all the minor prophets. They're filled with prophetic blueprints for the Messiah. For the anti-Messiah. They call him the Assyrian, and all kinds of different prophetic events that are prophesied. Again, in a survey like today, we could only hit just some of them. Now, chapter 3 in the Secrets of Hanukkah, the historic level mainly has to do with the Maccabean Hanukkah. The Maccabean Hanukkah. Because Daniel, especially in 10 and 11, prophesy, and 10 years later, it occurs, it happens in the Maccabean period, if you will. And so here is Daniel prophesying, and all of a sudden here, under Alexander and then Antiochus at 168, what is prophetic here becomes historic here. And of course, what is historic here is going to be a template for even a future fulfillment. Some would call this a double fulfillment, or this is a partial fulfillment and then a full fulfillment. And there's several words that scholars use. But this is going to occur. Now, what we find prophetically in the prophet, and especially in Daniel, was fulfilled historically in Antiochus. But we'll also find some double fulfillments. This is especially true of the vile man. The vile man. Now, here I put all of them together because historically, yes, this happened. Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Daniel spoke in the time of Babylon and Medo-Persia, and of course, historically Greece, Rome, and a future kingdom. And here is the 7 weeks. This from the time of Medo-Persia, from the time to rebuild Jerusalem, with the time of Artaxerxes and Nehemiah, 170,880 days to the coming of Messiah the Prince. And right now, you see, we have a 2,000-year gap now from the time of Rome. So we are living in this gap right now. We're living in this gap. And there's still 7 years to go. This is the 70th week of Daniel, made up of 3.5 year periods. This is still future. This is what people call tribulation week. Although the scriptures don't call it tribulation, call it the 70th week of Daniel. But has been fulfilled partially. Much of it has been already fully fulfilled. All this was fully fulfilled. And in our time, fully fulfilled. But some of these things are going to be completely fulfilled in the future kingdom. Now, one of the things in learning about the historic fulfillment of Daniel's prophecies, we need to read the historic books of the Maccabees. First Maccabees begins with Alexander of Macedon, a son of Philip, had come from the land of Kittim and defeated Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, whom he succeeded as ruler at first of Hellas. Hellas is Greece, the land of Helen of Troy. And Hellas became not only a country, but it became a doctrine. It became a social, cultural, it became a religious, it became an economic system that is called Hellenism. Again, the first book of Maccabees introduces us to Alexander the Great. And not only is Alexander the Great, again, a blueprint and template of the anti-Messiah. By the way, the first blueprint and template of the anti-Messiah would be Nimrod. Nimrod was the first potentate, it says there in Genesis 10, the first to amass a kingdom, the first to do a one-world government where he wanted everybody under his rule. And that's why he wanted all the cue ball, all the balls of the pool, all the pool balls, he wanted them all in his one little thing. And Adonai had to come with his cue ball and hit it and, break up the rack there. But the spirit of Nimrod is the spirit of a rebel. Now, again, the first world ruler. And Alexander the Great comes with his spirit and wanted to spread a worldview paradigm to the whole world. And that's what's going on in the world today. In fact, everybody wants their own little paradigm. The socialists have their paradigm. All these people have their paradigms of how they want the world. And of course, Torah has its own. We have our own. Now, my thing is, do we want the one that Adonai wants, or do we want all the hundreds and thousands that everybody else wants? Well, once you follow this one and this, this is what gets me. Like, we have the LGBT community, we have Islamic people, we have socialists, and everyone has their own paradigm. But if you really look at it, everyone's really against each other. If one of those guys win, they're going to knock off the other people. But if we follow what Adonai says, if we follow what Adonai wants, then that's where true unity. There is a one world system, and that's going to be the millennium. That's going to be the world under Torah, where Messiah is going to rule with a rod of iron, and he's going to rule the whole world. But we could get into that system now by being baptized into Messiah, by following Torah, by following his ways. We could get into the unity of the one new man and not the false unities of Nimrod and Alexander and all these so-called world leaders that want you to follow their new deals, their green deals. They all have a little moniker for what they want. But here's where it actually starts for us. Again, Yadua actually, was the high priest when Alexander came to Jerusalem. Now, Yadua knew the book of Daniel. He knew the book of Daniel. So when Alexander the Great comes into Jerusalem, Yadua sees him as the leopard, sees him as the one that Daniel had wrote about. And can you imagine, even Alexander the Great receives that. And he entered Jerusalem and worshipped as a Gentile at the temple. Before leaving, Alexander gave gifts to Jerusalem and to Yadua. So here we see, even historically, that Alexander the Great seems to have accepted the prophecies of Daniel. And again, this is 371 to 320. There's a lot of people that are saying that don't believe the book of Daniel because they say Daniel wrote history, not prophecy. We believe he wrote prophecy. They believe he wrote history. But here, historically, at 371, this is a historic moment. Now, with the arrival of Alexander the Great, and he brought Hellenism, he brought the Olympics, he brought all these things into Jerusalem. All of a sudden, there was all these people, Jewish people in Jerusalem, that loved the Hellenism, loved the way they dressed, loved the way they cut